That night, the wooden fence was still vibrating as my blood dripped onto the lawn. "Don't you say a word," she whispered, directly in front of the neighbor's security camera. The next morning, the clip was in my father's mailbox and in the company's all executives email. They thought shame would make me quit. Instead, I just smiled and opened the file I'd prepared for the day they would finally expose themselves. I am Mara Quinn, 32 years old, and the Director of Compliance for Norcrest Dynamics. My role is to find and follow the bright, unassailable line of the rules. I live in a world of codified procedures, federal regulations, and internal audits. My job is to ensure that a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and everyone in it, operates within the precise boundaries of the law. I do not live by those rules at home. At home, there are no rules, only power. I was standing in the hidden strip of grass behind my father's house in Everland Crest, a patch of land technically belonging to the HOA, but functionally annexed by our property line. It was 9:02 p.m. The air was thick and humid, smelling of damp, chemically treated St. Augustine grass, and the first hint of an ozone-heavy storm approaching from the west. The only light came from the flickering blue-white LED of the motion sensor security floodlight mounted on the garage, casting sharp, twitching shadows across the lawn. The cicadas were a deafening, electric scream in the manicured oak trees. I had just returned from the office, my heels sinking slightly into the soft turf. I was inspecting a new, unapproved sprinkler head that had been installed, a clear violation of the Everland Crest Covenant. Section 4, subsection B. I'd already logged the infraction in my personal file. That was when Helene found me. My stepmother didn't walk. She descended. Even in the dim light, her expensive yoga attire looked like armor, her blonde hair pulled into a severe, tight bun. She moved with the aggressive certainty of someone who had never been told no by the right people. She crossed the lawn in 5 quick strides, blocking my path to the gate. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was low, a controlled hiss that barely carried over the insects. "Checking the irrigation," I said, my voice flat. My briefcase still hung from my left hand. "You reported me," she said. It wasn't a question. "To the board." I noted a non-compliant installation. "You are trying to embarrass me, to embarrass your father." "I am following the rules we agreed to when we moved here." She laughed, a short, sharp sound, like glass breaking. "You and your pathetic little rules." Helene grabbed my right wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging into my skin, right over the pulse point. I didn't pull away. I stood perfectly still, my gaze fixed on the shared wooden fence just behind her shoulder. "You live in my house," she whispered, her face inches from mine. I could smell her perfume, something sharp and floral that couldn't mask the faint, acidic scent of the white wine she drank every evening. "You work in my husband's company. You are nothing." I said nothing. I simply waited. Her anger, fueled by my silence, finally broke its leash. Her left hand came up fast. It wasn't a slap. It was a punch, a closed fist, connecting with the high point of my right cheekbone. The sound was a dull, dense thwack. My head snapped to the side. A burst of white-hot, electric pain radiated from the point of impact, and I tasted the immediate, metallic tang of blood as my teeth cut the inside of my cheek. The world seemed to tilt and blur for a second. The wooden fence was still vibrating slightly from the impact of my shoulder hitting it. I blinked, refocusing. The pain settled into a deep, heavy throb. From the main house, the back patio door slid open, spilling warm, yellow light onto the lawn and illuminating the scene like a stage play. My father, Grant Quinn, CEO of Norcrest Dynamics, stood framed in the doorway. He was holding a heavy crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He didn't move from the threshold. "Helene, for God's sake," he called out, his voice weary and annoyed. Not alarmed, not angry, annoyed. "Keep it down. Don't make a scene. The neighbors." He was managing optics, as always. As if summoned by his words, a new sound cut through the night. A pleasant, digitized ding-dong chimed from the house next door. I turned my head slowly, ignoring the spike of pain. Next door, at Lyle Peterson's house, a small, black device mounted near his front door lit up. The Ring camera, a small, insidious red light, the color of a lit cigarette end, glowed brightly, aimed directly at the fence line. It was recording. Helene's breath hitched. She saw it, too. Her hand was still clenched into a fist. I looked directly into the small, black lens. My training, the instinct of my profession, took over. I was no longer a daughter. I was a compliance officer documenting an incident. My voice was steady, clear, and projected for the microphone. The time is 9:04 p.m. Tuesday, October 20th. Location: Everlyn Crest Common Property, adjacent to Lot 114. I was creating a verbal timestamp, metadata for the recording. I felt the blood drip from my lip, down my chin. Helene's face, a mask of aristocratic rage a moment before, crumpled into a new, paler expression. Calculation. Fear. You little bitch," she hissed, her voice now a panicked whisper, useless against the audio recording. "You're trying to ruin this family. You went to the board, smearing us, telling them lies." The accusation was the root of it. I had attended the monthly HOA meeting last week. I had sat in the back of the community clubhouse and, during the open forum, I had asked a simple question about the landscaping budget. I'd asked why the HOA was paying a vendor, Braxton Vale Services, 40% above market rate for basic lawn maintenance, and why the contract had been auto-renewed without a competitive bid. Helene, who sat on the HOA board as its treasurer, had declared the question out of order. Now she saw the connection. The punch wasn't just anger, it was suppression. I didn't answer her. I calmly reached into the pocket of my blazer with my free hand, the one she wasn't gripping. I slid my phone out partway, thumbed the side button twice, and felt the small, confirmatory buzz. The audio recorder app was now active, a high-fidelity backup, capturing her panicked whispers. My father's continued silence from the doorway, the sound of the wind in the trees, redundancy. Never trust a single source of data. I let my phone slide back into the darkness of my pocket. "Helene, get inside," my father called again, his voice sharper now. The scene was lasting too long. The risk of exposure was increasing. Helene finally released my wrist, leaving 4 white, bloodless marks that quickly turned red. She took a step back, wiping her hand on her yoga pants as if she'd touched something unclean. Just then, Lyle Peterson's front door opened. Lyle was 70, a retired electrical engineer who spent his days monitoring his surveillance feeds and the HOA forums. He emerged, shuffling quickly in a bathrobe and slippers, his white hair a mess. He wasn't running to intervene. He was running to confirm. He stopped 10 feet away, on his own immaculate lawn, careful not to cross the property line. He squinted at me, then at Helene, who had frozen near the fence. "Mara, you all right?" he called out. I didn't answer his question. I just looked at him. He seemed to understand. He wasn't there to offer comfort. He was there to deliver a status report. "It's all on the cloud," he said, his voice practical, almost excited. He pointed a shaky finger at his camera. "That thing saves automatically. The moment it detects motion, it buffers and uploads. It's not on a local drive. It's backed up, off-site. Got the whole thing." Helene made a small, strangled sound. My father, Grant Quinn, quietly slid his glass door shut, retreating into the yellow light of his kitchen, leaving his wife and his daughter in the dark. The incident was over. He was contained. I tasted the blood again. The throbbing in my cheek was settling into a deep, painful ache that I knew would be a spectacular bruise by morning. A bruise that would be seen by everyone in the office. A bruise they would all pretend not to notice. I looked at Lyle. I gave him a single, slow nod, acknowledgement of receipt. A piece of evidence was now secure, a non-mutable, time-stamped, third-party record of an assault, an asset. Helene turned and walked quickly, almost running, back to the house, her shoulders hunched. She didn't look back. I stayed by the fence for another minute, listening to the cicadas and the distant rumble of the approaching storm. The flickering security light clicked off, plunging the yard back into darkness. I raised my hand and gently touched the swelling skin on my face. It was tender, already hot. It was a liability for her, but for me, it was the beginning of a file. A file that, I knew, was already connected to so much more than a simple landscaping contract. I stood in the sterile white light of my ensuite bathroom, the kind of lighting that shows no mercy. It illuminated the rapidly darkening bloom on my right cheekbone. It was a masterpiece of purple, blue, and an angry deep red, already swelling to the point where it pulled the skin under my eye taut. I touched it, a clinical, detached press of my fingertip. It was hot, solid, and throbbed with a dull, systemic ache. It was an objective fact, a data point. I live in a world of facts. The other world, the one my father built, runs on narrative. Norcrest Dynamics is not just a company, it's the gospel of Grant Quinn. It's a regional leader in specialized logistics and risk management solutions, which is a sterile, SEC-approved way of saying we move valuable, difficult things for powerful, difficult people. My father built it from a single freight contract into a publicly traded behemoth that dominates the state's economy. And inside its glass and steel headquarters, our family behaves like a minor, dysfunctional royal court. My father is the king, of course, Grant Quinn, the visionary, the man whose framed portrait in the lobby is lit with the reverence of a religious icon. And Helene, my stepmother, is his chosen queen. She is not, as many assume, a simple second wife who married well. Helene came from the game. Before she was a Quinn, she was Helene Rostova, the ferociously competent head of investor relations for a rival firm. She understands that value is not about what something is, but what it can be perceived to be. She spent 2 decades managing the expectations of analysts and taming shareholder revolts. She is a master of the narrative. She married my father 5 years ago, merging her personal and professional ambitions into one unstoppable portfolio. Then there is the princess, Sable, Helene's daughter, 3 months ago. My father, in a move celebrated in the internal newsletter as fostering next-generation talent, placed Sable in the Strategic Initiatives Department. Strategy is the most narrative-driven division of all. It's where you get paid to imagine the future, to blue sky and ideate in meetings that produce nothing but expensive slide decks. Sable, with her fresh MBA and effortless charisma, was born for it. She was given a title, Strategic Liaison, that meant nothing and everything. It meant she could walk into any meeting, report to no one but my father, and absorb the company's power by osmosis. And then there is me, Mara Quinn, the ghost at the feast. I did not enter Norcrest Dynamics through the grand lobby. I did not get a welcome newsletter. 10 years ago, with my accounting degree and my auditing certification, I applied under my mother's maiden name, Mara Thorne. I was hired into internal audit. Internal audit is the opposite of strategy. It is the company's conscience, its memory, its digestive tract. We are the people who come in after the party, after the narrative has been sold, and check the receipts. We are not loved. We are not invited to the blue sky sessions. We live in the concrete, immutable past. We follow the money. I spent 5 years in that windowless office, learning the corporation's true anatomy, not the optimistic org chart my father showed investors, but the real one, the tangled network of vendor contracts, expense accounts, offshore shell companies, and handshake deals. I learned where the real power flowed. I was good at it. So good that when the previous director of compliance was quietly forced into early retirement after a disagreement with Helene over executive travel budgets, the board's audit committee offered me the job. They needed someone who knew the books, and they assumed someone my father could control. They were half right. I knew the books. My promotion to director of compliance forced the issue. I was Mara Quinn again. My father had to acknowledge me. He hosted a dinner. At our house in Everland Crest. Dinner is not a meal. It's a press conference. We sit at a long, polished mahogany table in a dining room kept perpetually cold. There are security cameras in this room, just as there are in every common area of the house. Small, black domes with discrete red lights, identical to Lyle's, but part of my father's own integrated system. He calls it security. I call it total surveillance. We eat, and we perform for an audience of no one, or perhaps an audience of our future selves, should the footage ever be reviewed in a legal discovery. At that first dinner, Helene raised her glass of chilled Sauvignon Blanc. "To Mara," she said, her smile as bright and hard as the recessed lighting. Finally joining the family business, in a role that so perfectly suits her, diligence. The faint, delicate condescension was for me. The performance of a proud stepmother was for the cameras. At the company, the performance is just as constant, though more desperate. The hallways of the 32nd floor, the executive floor, are not walkways, they are red carpets. To walk from the elevator to the boardroom is to navigate a gauntlet of performative subservience. Secretaries who smile too widely, vice presidents who angle their bodies in deference as Helene or my father passes. The air is thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and quiet. Calculated flattery. People don't speak. They pitch. Every casual conversation is an attempt to align with power. I was never good at that. I learned early that in a place where words are weapons of narrative, silence is a shield and a tool. While they were all busy talking, I was listening and reading. Helene mistook my silence for weakness, for a lack of it. "You have no executive presence, Mara," she told me once, cornering me by the espresso machine in the executive lounge. It was a few months after Sable's arrival. She was dressed for a magazine shoot, and I was in my standard, severe charcoal gray suit. "You don't know how to smile for the camera," she continued, gesturing vaguely. "People need to feel leadership. They need warmth, aspiration. When you walk into a room, all they feel is an audit." I just looked at her. "Compliance isn't aspirational, Helene." "That's your problem," she said, turning away, dismissing me. "You'll always be middle management." She was right about one thing. I don't look at the camera. I look at the reports. I look at the regulations. I look at the metadata, the contracts, and the SEC filings. I look at the places where smiling is not required to win, because the data is absolute. A 40% budget overrun is a 40% budget overrun. No matter how warmly you smile when you present it, a conflict of interest remains a conflict, even if it's signed by the CEO's wife. The night by the fence, the punch, the clip, that was just the final drop. The moment the narrative finally, fatally, collided with reality, Helene, the master of optics, lost control of her own image for 30 seconds, right in front of a recording device. She, who lived by the camera, was about to die by it. My file on her was already 6 inches thick. I had been tracking the Braxton Vale Services contract for 6 months, ever since I saw its name appear in both the HOA budget and in a completely separate audit, as a community outreach partner for Norcrest Dynamics. I had been cross-referencing incorporation papers. I had been mapping the network. I knew, for a fact, that Helene was funneling company money, under the guise of charitable donations, through the HOA's landscaping budget and into a shell company. But it was all just paper, data, numbers on a screen. It was complex, and complex things can be explained away. They can be buried in committees, blamed on clerical errors, and lost in the narrative. But a punch? A punch is not complex. It is simple, clear, and brutal. Helene's mistake was in thinking my pathetic little rules were limited to the HOA. She forgot my real job. She forgot that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the SEC's own whistleblower protections have very clear, very sharp teeth regarding fraudulent entries, conflicts of interest, and the personal conduct of signing officers. I turned off the bathroom light. The throbbing in my cheek felt like a clock, ticking. The bruise was not a liability, it was leverage. It was the human, emotional cover page for the cold, hard data I already possessed. Helene had just given me the one thing I was missing, the perfect, undeniable, and deeply aspirational motive to burn her narrative to the ground. My file was no longer just full, it was complete. The next morning, I was at my desk at 6 a.m. The 28th floor was a silent, air-conditioned tomb. The sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows a pale, pre-dawn gray. The bruise on my cheek was a spectacular, multi-hued galaxy of pain. I had applied a thin layer of concealer, not to hide it, but to transform it from a personal injury into a professional curiosity. It was now a statement, a silent question mark for anyone who saw it. Let them wonder, let them talk, let their whispers build the narrative for me. My inbox chimed at 6:15 a.m. The email was from a Proton Mail account, a ghost address with no name attached. The subject line was a single word: maintenance. Attached was a password-protected PDF. The password was in the body of the email: Everlyn Covenant 4B. Section 4, subsection B, the sprinkler head. It was a message. I entered the password. The file opened. It was a complete, scanned copy of the Everlyn Crest HOA's internal ledger for the past 24 months, focused exclusively on the Grounds and Beautification Fund. It was the kind of document a treasurer would have, but not one they would ever release to a resident. I saw line items, vendor codes, payment dates, and authorization signatures. Helene's clean, sharp signature was on every single disbursement. It was a gift. My anonymous benefactor, I had a strong suspicion it was a retired electrical engineer with a penchant for cloud storage, had just saved me weeks of filing official requests that would have been denied. I spent the next hour cross-referencing the ledger with the Norcrest Dynamics files I already had open on my second monitor. My world was now 2 columns of data. Side by side, on the left, a small suburban homeowners association. On the right, a publicly traded corporation. The crack in the neighborhood wall was about to become a fissure in the company's annual report. The connection, when I confirmed it, was as simple and elegant as a hangman's knot. The HOA ledger showed monthly payments of exactly $25,000 to a vendor named Braxton Vale Services. The description for each payment was vague: landscape contract and community enhancement. I switched to the Norcrest files. Last year, in a push to bolster our public image, the company had produced its first ever ESG report, an environmental, social, and governance document designed to showcase our corporate citizenship. Helene had personally overseen the social pillar of the report, one of her proudest achievements. Detailed in a glossy 2-page spread was the creation of the Norcrest Cares Community Grant, a fund dedicated to supporting grassroots initiatives in the communities our employees call home. The report listed the grant's recipients. The largest single recipient, receiving a quarterly beautification grant of $75,000, was an organization called the Braxton Vale Charitable Fund. Braxton Vale. The name was the bridge between the 2 columns of data. I pulled the vendor registration files for both entities. For the HOA, Braxton Vale Services listed its business address as a P.O. box in a town 50 miles away. For Norcrest, the Braxton Vale Charitable Fund listed its address as a different P.O. box in the same town, a flimsy attempt to create separation. But they had made a mistake, a small, lazy, arrogant mistake. On the W-9 form submitted to the HOA, and on the grant application submitted to Norcrest, the federal taxpayer identification number was identical. They were the same entity. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened a new Excel workbook, a clean slate. I began to build a table, a simple, brutal comparison. Column A, date of payment, from Norcrest Cares. Column B, amount paid, $75,000. Column C, recipient, Braxton Vale Charitable Fund. Column D, date of payment, from HOA. Column E, amount paid, $25,000. Column F, vendor, Braxton Vale Services. The pattern was immediate and damning. 3 days after Norcrest paid the charitable fund $75,000, the HOA would pay the landscaping service $25,000. It was a perfect one-third kickback, laundered through the HOA's books. Norcrest Company funds, designated for charity, were being funneled into a shell, which then overcharged the HOA for basic services Helene, as treasurer, would approve. The excess cash vanished into the Braxton Vale entity. It was a circular, self-sustaining machine for embezzlement. The money flowed in a loop, like an overly bright, cheap necklace worn to impress. This was no longer about a non-compliant sprinkler head. This was wire fraud. This was a breach of fiduciary duty. This was a material weakness in the company's internal financial controls. I paused, my eyes scanning the neat rows of numbers. The data was cold, clean, and irrefutable, but it lacked context. It lacked motive. It lacked the human element that transforms an accounting anomaly into a crime of passion and greed. I opened a new document, a formal memorandum. The title was Preliminary Internal Review, Vendor Payment Protocols and Community Grant Disbursements. I began to write, translating the spreadsheet into narrative. I detailed the overlapping entities, the identical tax IDs, the suspicious payment timing. For each section of the report, for each exhibit I attached, the HOA ledger, the ESG report, the 09 forms, I embedded a hyperlink at the bottom of the page. The text for each link was the same. Exhibit D, corroborating behavioral pattern. The link did not go to another document. It went to a private, password-protected cloud server. It linked directly to the 32-second video file Lyle had sent me at 11:48 p.m. the night before. The video of Helene's fist connecting with my face. I was framing the financial crime within the context of the physical assault. I was telling anyone who read this report, the person who signed these fraudulent checks is the same person who did this. The ethics are consistent. The abuse of power is the same, whether it's with a fist or with a pen. At 10 o'clock a.m., the draft was complete. It was a precise, surgical, and utterly damning document. I attached it to a new email. My first step had to follow corporate protocol. I had a duty to report my findings internally. The recipient was Arthur Vance, Norcrest's General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer. Arthur was a company man, a lawyer who had been with my father for 30 years. His loyalty was not to the law, it was to Grant Quinn. The subject line was deliberately neutral. Query regarding vendor onboarding. I hit send, and then I waited. The rest of the day was silence. No reply from Arthur, no phone call. My email tracker showed it had been opened within 3 minutes of my sending it. It had been opened again, from a different IP address, likely forwarded, 20 minutes later. Then nothing. This was the test. The corporate immune system had detected a threat and was now deciding how to respond. They weren't ignoring me. They were giving me the opportunity to back down. They were offering me silence in exchange for my own. They were waiting to see if the daughter would blink before the compliance officer did. I did not blink. I spent the afternoon refining the memorandum. I added a section on the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, citing the specific clauses related to the responsibilities of corporate officers. I added another on the potential reputational damage to the company's ESG platform. I polished every sentence until it had the cold, hard gleam of a scalpel. At 4:59 p.m., 1 minute before the close of business, I made my decision. The internal channel had failed its test. The silence was my answer. It was a confirmation of complicity. I opened a new email. I attached the final, polished version of the report, the one with the legal citations and the embedded link to the video. This email was not addressed to the company's lawyer. It was addressed to the private, external email addresses of the 3 independent members of the Norcrest Dynamics Board of Directors, the ones who chaired the audit committee, the retired judge, the former CFO of a Fortune 100 company, and the dean of the state's top business school. The people whose personal and professional reputations were legally on the line. The people who answered to the shareholders, not to my father. My subject line was no longer neutral. It was, urgent, formal whistleblower report, submitted to the audit committee. I clicked send. The sound of the outgoing mail server felt like a closing door. There was no going back. The report was now in the wild, beyond my father's control, beyond Helene's reach. I had bypassed the palace guard and delivered the message directly to the visiting kings. I shut down my computer. The bruise on my face ached, a dull, persistent reminder of the night before. But for the first time, it didn't feel like an injury. It felt like a seal, the official stamp on a document that would change everything. The boardroom on the 32nd floor was a box of cold, clear glass, suspended in a flat, gray sky. The aluminum gray light of the overcast Monday morning flooded the room, reflecting off the polished black granite of the long table, making it look like a sheet of dark water. There was no warmth. The only sound was the omnipresent, high-pitched hiss of the industrial air conditioning, a sterile, manufactured wind. We were all seated. At the head of the table were the 3 independent directors, the audit committee, Judge Davies, retired from the federal bench, his face an unreadable mask of judicial neutrality, Dean Blackwell, who ran the State University's business school, his fingers steepled, looking like he was about to critique a dissertation, and beside him, Rhea Aris, the former CFO of a Fortune 100 firm, her eyes sharp, analytical, and missing nothing. On one side of the table sat the company, my father, Grant Quinn, at the center, his posture rigid, exuding the strained patience of a king holding court for a complaint he deemed beneath him. Beside him, Arthur Vance, our general counsel, shuffling papers that were already perfectly aligned, and beside Arthur, Helene. Helene sat directly opposite me. She was immaculate. Her suit was a severe, expensive cut of navy blue. Her makeup was a flawless, professional mask, layered with expert care to almost, but not quite, conceal the yellowish-purple shadow of a healing bruise on her jaw. A faint echo of my own more spectacular one. She looked cold, bored, and untouchable, but I could see her left hand, resting on her leather-bound portfolio. She was rhythmically tapping her index finger, and on her right wrist, just peeking from the cuff of her silk blouse, was a thin, bright red scratch, a defensive mark. My mark. I sat alone on the other side of the table. My laptop was closed in front of me. My own bruise was on full display. I had done nothing to hide it. It was my first piece of evidence. Judge Davies cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel. We have received a formal whistleblower report from Ms. Mara Quinn, Director of Compliance. This report makes significant allegations. We are convened as the audit committee, with Mr. Quinn and Ms. Quinn present as relevant parties, to review the preliminary findings. Ms. Quinn, Mara, the floor is yours. My father held up his hand, a gesture of absolute casual authority. Before we begin, Judge, he said, his voice calm and reasonable, I think it's important to establish context here. He turned his gaze down the table, not to me, but to the directors. What you have received is a product of an internal family dispute. He said the words, family dispute, as if they were a magic incantation that would make the SEC filings and fraud allegations disappear. We are a family, he continued, finally looking at me. His eyes filled not with anger, but with a deep, profound disappointment that was, in its own way, 1,000 times more coercive. We are a family, and you do not bring family matters, internal disagreements, before a board of directors. This is not the appropriate forum. He was trying to change the venue, to move this from a boardroom to a living room, to frame me as the hysterical daughter, not the compliance officer. I did not answer him. I did not look at him. I opened my laptop. The small click of the lid opening was the only sound. I plugged the HDMI cable into the port on the table. The snick of the connection seating was sharp, final. My laptop screen flashed onto the 80-inch display at the end of the room. It was not a slide deck, it was an Excel file. I had named it Vendor Crosswalk ESG HOA XLSX. "This is not a family matter," I said, my voice as flat and cold as the glass walls. "This is a matter of financial controls and wire fraud." I used my mouse, and the cursor moved across the giant screen. On the left, you see the payment ledger for the Norcrest Cares Community Grant, an ESG initiative. On the right, the vendor payment ledger for the Everland Crest Homeowners Association, of which Ms. Helene Quinn is the treasurer. You will note the identical tax identification number for the Braxton Vale Charitable Fund and Braxton Vale Services, highlighted in yellow. I moved the cursor. Here, you see the flow of funds, a $75,000 quarterly payment from Norcrest to the charity, and here, 3 days later, a $25,000 payment from the HOA to the landscaping service with the same tax ID, a 33.3% kickback, laundered through an employee-run homeowners association, using corporate funds disguised as charitable giving. Rhea Aris leaned forward. Her eyes were fixed on the flowchart I had drawn at the bottom, the neat arrows showing the circular path of the money. "Who has signature authority on the Norcrest Cares disbursements?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. "Helene Quinn, as head of the ESG steering committee," I said. "And on the HOA account?" "Helene Quinn, as treasurer." My father started to speak. "Now, this is a simple clerical." I clicked the mouse, one single click. The Excel file vanished, replaced by a new window, a video player. I clicked play. The clip from Lyle's Ring camera filled the screen. There was no sound. As the outline had specified, the silence made it infinitely worse. It was clinical. It was surveillance. The video showed the dark, grainy lawn. It showed Helene, her face contorted in a mask of rage I had never seen in the boardroom. It showed her grabbing my wrist. It showed me standing passively. And then it showed the punch. Her fist, closed, the impact, my head snapping back, hitting the fence. No one spoke. No one moved. Helene's pen, which had been tapping, was now dead still. Arthur Vance was studying the grain of the granite table as if it held the secrets of the universe. My father was staring at the screen, his face white, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. The clip was only 32 seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. It played on a loop. I let it play twice. The punch, the pause, the replay, the punch, the pause. "What?" Dean Blackwell whispered, his academic composure shattered. "What are we watching?" I let the silence hang, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the relentless hiss of the air conditioning. Then, I clicked the mouse again. I paused the video on the single, most damning frame. Helene's fist raised, her face a mask of violence, my hair obscuring my face as I took the blow. The image froze on the screen, a grotesque tableau. I clicked again. The screen changed. The video was gone, replaced by a high-resolution scan. It was the signature page for the Braxton Vale Services landscaping contract, the $25,000 a month contract. And at the bottom, Helene's signature, elegant, confident, looping, Helene Quinn. I let the two images hang in the air for a moment, the frozen punch, the flowing signature. Then I spoke, my voice quiet, cutting through the silence. "The behavior at the fence," I said, looking directly at Rhea Aris, "reflects the ethics in the contract." I had just linked the violent, emotional act to the cold, financial crime. I had provided motive, character, and method. I had shown them that the person capable of this physical abuse was the same person capable of this financial abuse. The arrogance was identical. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. My father looked like he had been struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The narrative was no longer his. Rhea Aris was the first to move. She looked away from the screen, her gaze settling on me. Her eyes were not warm, not sympathetic. They were cold, hard, and appreciative. She was a numbers person. I had given her the numbers, and I had given her the motive. "Ms. Quinn?" she said, her voice crisp. The shift from Mara to Ms. Quinn was the sound of a wall being built, a wall between me, the whistleblower, and my father, the CEO. "I would like a hard copy of this presentation and all supporting documentation, immediately." "I have them here," I said. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 4 thick, spiral-bound reports. I had made one for each of them, and one for outside counsel. I slid them across the polished table. They were heavy. They landed with a solid, satisfying thud. Judge Davies nodded slowly. He looked at Arthur Vance, our general counsel, who had been rendered utterly silent. "Arthur," the judge said, his voice quiet but final, "I believe it is time for you to engage outside counsel. Now, the committee will take over from here." It was done. The palace guard had been disarmed. Arthur Vance, his face pale, fumbled for his phone. He stood, walked to the glass wall, and turned his back to the room. We all watched his reflection as he dialed. "Yes," we heard him murmur, his voice thin. "I need a team from the white-collar group in the 32nd floor boardroom. Immediately. There is a situation." My father stared at me. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions: fury, betrayal, and a strange, dawning horror. He wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at a strategic threat he had fatally underestimated. Helene just stared at the blank screen, where her signature had been. She was perfectly, utterly still, like a beautiful statue that had just been pushed off its pedestal. By the time I returned to my desk on the 28th floor, my phone had started to vibrate. It wasn't a single call or text, but the frantic, incessant buzzing of a social media group chat catching fire. I glanced at the screen. The notification was from the Everlyn Crest Community Watch group on a neighborhood app. Lyle Peterson had made the first post. It was just the video, no caption, no explanation, just the raw, 32-second, silent clip of Helene punching me by the fence. The reaction was instantaneous, a digital firestorm in a bottle. Brenda S. at 212. "Is that Helene Quinn? At the HOA? What is happening?" Mark P. Lot 108. "That's Grant Quinn's backyard. That's his daughter. Mara. The one who works at Norcrest. My God." Susan G. at 119. "I saw Mara later that night. She had a terrible bruise. I thought she'd fallen. This is assault." Lyle Peterson, Lot 115. "Video was recorded on my security camera last Tuesday at 9:04 p.m. It is unedited." The conversation exploded. For the first few minutes, it was pure shock and outrage. The kind of digital rubbernecking that happens when the carefully curated facade of a wealthy suburb is torn away. But then, the tone shifted. The seed of doubt I had planted at that HOA meeting a few weeks ago began to germinate in the fertile ground of this new scandal. Karen W. "Wait a minute. Helene Quinn is the HOA treasurer. The woman who controls our money is this? This is how she handles a disagreement?" David C. at 130. "Is anyone else wondering about that special assessment for the front gate repairs that never happened? My fees have gone up 20% in 2 years." Brenda S. "Tell me about it. I've reported the broken swing set at the playground 3 times. They keep saying there are no available funds for non-essential repairs. Where is all the money going?" That was the key. Brenda, a young mother with 2 small children, had just unknowingly connected the violence in the video to the numbers in the ledger. She had given the abstract concept of financial mismanagement a tangible, relatable face. A broken playground swing. Then, Lyle dropped the second bomb. He posted a new message. This time it was a photo, a crisp, clear scan of an invoice from Braxton Vale Services. The invoice was for $25,000 for grounds and beautification. Lyle Peterson, at 115. "This is the vendor our treasurer, Ms. Quinn, has been paying every month. I've done some checking. This company shares a tax ID with a charitable fund that receives major grants from Norcrest Dynamics, where her husband is CEO. Something isn't right. The chat went quiet for a full minute as the 100-plus households in the group absorbed the implication. Lyle had just drawn a direct, public line from the punch at the fence to the corporate treasury of Norcrest Dynamics. He had taken my boardroom presentation and distilled it into a single, devastating social media post. The dam broke. The story was no longer just about a neighborhood dispute. By 3 o'clock, a reporter from the Grayford Ledger, our local digital newspaper, was in the group chat, asking for comment. By 4 p.m., the first article was live. The headline was brutal. Video shows Norcrest exec's wife in violent altercation amid questions of HOA fund mismanagement. The article embedded the video and quoted anonymous residents from the group chat. It mentioned the broken playground, it named Braxton Vale Services, and it noted that Norcrest Dynamics, the region's largest employer, had a charitable partnership with a fund of a similar name, also overseen by Helene Quinn. The fire was no longer contained to Everlyn Crest. It was now a corporate crisis. I watched the Norcrest internal messaging system light up. Status icons went from green to yellow as people clustered in offices, whispering. Many of our mid-level managers and employees lived in Everlyn Crest. They were in that group chat. They were reading the Grayford Ledger. They were connecting the woman who smiled at them in the hallways to the woman in the video. And they were connecting their rising HOA fees to the corporate grants they read about in company newsletters. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a private text message from Sable. Sable, I hope you're happy. You're destroying our family. You're destroying my home. I looked at her message, the words of a person whose entire world was built on a narrative that was currently being shredded by facts. She saw a home. I saw a crime scene. I typed my reply. Mara, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just turning on the lights. She didn't write back. At 4:30 p.m., the official email landed in every Norcrest employee's inbox. It was from the office of the CEO. The subject was Leadership Announcement. The tone was cold, precise, and drenched in corporate legalese. To all Norcrest Dynamics employees. In light of recent events and allegations that have come to our attention, the Board of Directors has commenced an independent, third-party investigation into potential conflicts of interest related to our community grant programs. Pending the results of this investigation, Helene Quinn will be taking a voluntary leave of absence from all her duties and responsibilities at Norcrest Dynamics, effective immediately. We are committed to upholding the highest standards of ethics and transparency and will take all necessary actions to ensure the integrity of our operations. We appreciate your continued focus and dedication during this period. Sincerely, Grant Quinn, CEO, Norcrest Dynamics. It was a masterclass in crisis management. It acknowledged the problem without admitting guilt. It announced an independent investigation that was, for now, still controlled by the company, and it used the phrase voluntary leave of absence, a gentle euphemism for a suspension. I checked the stock price. It had dipped 1.5% in the last hour of trading. A minor tremor. I logged into a private investor forum I monitored. The reaction there was surprisingly positive. User Stonk Watch 22. Quinn moved fast. Cutting his wife loose, for now, pending a probe is the right call. Shows the board is serious about governance. Might be a buying opportunity if this blows over quick. User Value Investor 81. Transparency is key. Better to take the hit now than let it fester. The ESG narrative takes a knock. But if the investigation is legit, they can rebuild trust. They saw it as a strong, decisive move to protect the company. They saw it as good governance. They didn't see the boardroom meeting. They didn't see the silent, looping video. They didn't see a father being forced to publicly sacrifice his wife to save his company from his daughter. I packed my briefcase. As I walked towards the elevators, I saw him. My father was standing with Arthur Vance at the far end of the long hallway, their backs to the huge glass windows overlooking the city. They were speaking in low, urgent tones. He must have felt my presence. He looked up. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the polished marble floor. In his eyes, I saw no recognition, no anger, no sorrow. He wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at a foreign object, a piece of rogue code in his system that had caused a catastrophic failure. He looked at me, and then he looked away, turning back to his lawyer as if I wasn't there at all. That was the answer. He had made his choice. He had chosen the company. He had chosen the narrative. He had chosen to stand in the sterile, air-conditioned world of the 32nd floor and let the fires burn outside. He could no longer look me in the eye, because I was no longer part of his world. I was the inconvenient, undeniable fact that had just broken it. I didn't go home. Home was a place of surveillance and simmering violence. My office, on the other hand, was now a sanctuary, a fortress of fact. I returned to the 28th floor around 9 p.m. The building had emptied. The frenetic energy of the day bled out into the city below, which now glittered as a vast, indifferent circuit board of distant lights. The only illumination on my floor came from the emergency lights in the hallways and the green glow of network hubs, casting long, ghostly shadows. My corner office was an island of controlled, quiet light in the vast darkness of the corporate tower. It was waiting for me on the clean, polished surface of my desk, placed dead center on my leather blotter. A standard 9x12 manila envelope, no postage, no courier markings. It had been hand-delivered, my name. Mara Quinn was printed on a plain white label in a generic sans serif font, nothing else. I felt a cold, electric prickle on my skin. This was not from the board. This was not from outside counsel. This was from someone on the inside, a ghost in the machine. I slit the envelope open with a letter opener. My movements precise, careful not to tear the contents. I slid the papers out. There were about 20 pages, held together by a single, heavy-duty staple. The paper was heavy, a premium bond stock reserved for executive-level contracts. The cover page read, "Sponsorship Agreement between the Norcrest Cares Community Grant and the Everlyn Youth Gardens Initiative." Everlyn Youth Gardens. I had never heard of it. It wasn't on the list of grant recipients in the ESG report. It was a new branch of the investigation, a new vein of rot. I turned the page. The agreement detailed a one-time grant of $150,000 from Norcrest to fund the creation of a community garden and educational green space for the children of Everlyn Crest. A noble, unimpeachable cause, the kind of thing that wins community relations awards. The contract was dated 6 months ago. I flipped to the last page, the signature page. There was my father's signature, as CEO of Norcrest, and below it, Helene's signature, as the authorizing party from the Norcrest Cares Committee. But next to her signature was something else, something that made my breath catch. It was an embossed seal, a small, circular impression pressed directly into the paper, a sunburst design with her initials. HQ in the center. It was her personal notary seal. This wasn't just a signature. It was a personal, legal attestation, an act of profound, almost theatrical, arrogance. She wasn't just signing off on this. She was personally guaranteeing it. But it was the appendices that held the real poison. Appendix A was a detailed budget for the garden. It listed costs for soil, lumber for raised beds, irrigation systems, and a significant line item for project management and landscape design. The vendor contracted for this work was a company called Blue Ridge Contracting, LLC. The name was unfamiliar. Appendix B was the vendor registration form for Blue Ridge Contracting. I scanned the details. Address, a P.O. box in a rural town 3 counties away. The registered agent, the legal contact for the company, was listed as one Mr. Julian Rostova. Helene's maiden name. My fingers moved quickly, quietly, on my keyboard. A public record search. Julian Rostova. Age 42. A handful of minor infractions. A failed real estate license application, and a known address that matched his voter registration. He was Helene's younger brother. The shell company had been set up in his name. Appendix C was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. It was a copy of the bank transfer instructions. The $150,000 grant was not to be wired to Blue Ridge Contracting's primary business account. Instead, it was to be sent to a different account at a smaller regional bank. The instructions included a specific payment reference code, a long string of alphanumeric characters, required for the transfer. The code looked familiar. A string like that is designed to be unique, a digital fingerprint for a single transaction. I pulled up my own research files. I had been looking into Sable's activities, trying to understand her role in the Strategic Initiatives Department. Her corporate expense reports were clean, but her public-facing life was a different story. She was a prolific social media user, cultivating an image as a young, dynamic influencer in the corporate wellness space. She frequently collaborated with other brands and agencies. I found the file, a screenshot I had taken of an invoice from a boutique media firm, Aura Digital Marketing, that Sable had accidentally posted to her Instagram story before quickly deleting it. The invoice was for Brand Synergy Consulting. At the bottom of the invoice was a reference code for payment. I put the two strings side by side on my screen. The bank reference code from the garden contract, the invoice reference code from Sable's marketing consultant. They were identical. The machine was suddenly, horrifyingly clear. Helene approved a fraudulent grant from Norcrest. The money went to a shell company run by her brother. A significant portion of that money was then funneled from the brother's company to a media firm to pay for services that were building her own daughter's personal brand. It was a closed loop of familial corruption. Helene was using corporate money to enrich her brother and to bankroll her daughter's career, all under the pristine, untouchable cover of a children's garden that likely never existed. I sat back, the silence of the office pressing in. This was the next level. The evidence I had presented to the board was damning, but it was, arguably, contained to Helene. This pulled in her entire family. This implicated Sable. I stood up and walked to the high-speed printer outside my office. My movements were slow, deliberate. I was establishing a chain of custody for one. I laid each page of the contract on the scanner, creating a high-resolution PDF. Then, I printed a fresh copy. Back at my desk, I took out a red pen. I numbered each page. In the bottom right corner, B001, B002, B003. The B was for Braxton, a private nod to the thread that started it all. Then, I took out my phone. I placed each numbered page, one by one, on the neutral gray of my desk blotter. I took a clear, top-down photograph of every single page. My phone's camera automatically embedded the date and time in the image's metadata, a digital timestamp. The process took 20 minutes. When I was done, I had a physical copy, a paginated physical copy, a high-resolution PDF, and a complete time-stamped photographic record. Redundancy. I logged into the secure portal for the external auditing firm, the global accounting giant the board used to certify our annual reports. I composed a new message, addressed to the lead partner on the Norcrest account. The subject was, Addendum to Whistleblower Report, dated October 20th. I wrote a single sentence. Please find attached supplementary evidence of further undisclosed related party transactions and potential misappropriation of corporate funds. I attached the scanned PDF and the folder of time-stamped photographs. I clicked send. The files uploaded into the encrypted ether, disappearing from my control, materializing on a server in a different city, under the purview of impartial, unforgiving accountants. I leaned back in my chair. A profound sense of finality washed over me. It was done. The first report had been a family matter, a daughter against a stepmother, but this was different. This was no longer in my hands. It was no longer in my father's hands. It was in the hands of the auditors, the lawyers, the regulators. It was a formal, impersonal process now. A machine had been fed, and it would grind forward, with or without me. I packed my briefcase, the original envelope now sealed within a protected sleeve inside. I walked out of my office, the lights shutting off behind me, and rode the silent elevator down to the lobby. The main lobby was a cavern of marble and glass, empty except for a lone security guard. On the far wall, dominating the space, was a massive, backlit photograph. It was taken 10 years ago, on the company's 25th anniversary. It was a picture of the executive team, beaming. My father was at the center, younger, his hair darker, his smile effortless and confident. He looked invincible, the man who had built an empire. I walked over to it, my heels clicking softly on the marble. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the photograph, at the monument to a past that was now irrevocably gone. I raised my hand and placed my fingertips against the cool, smooth surface of the protective glass. In the dim reflection, I could see my own face, superimposed over the image of my father's triumphant team. The bruise on my cheek was a faint, fading shadow, a map of a battle that was already over. My expression was not angry, not sad, not triumphant. It was just calm, calmer than I had ever felt in my entire life. Norcrest Hall was not a boardroom, it was a theater, a 3,000-seat auditorium built for product launches and triumphant all-hands meetings, a monument to my father's ego. Today, it was a courtroom, and it was standing room only. The air was thick and hot, smelling of damp wool coats and nervous sweat. Every seat was filled with shareholders, employees, institutional investors, and a hungry-looking press corps that lined the aisles. The local news affiliates had set up live feed cameras near the entrance, their red recording lights glowing like malevolent eyes in the dim house lighting. This was no longer an internal memo. This was a public execution or a public acquittal. There would be no middle ground. The stage was set with a long, dark table, microphones, and glasses of water, just like a congressional hearing. In the center, a colossal screen, currently black, loomed over the proceedings. My father walked out first, to a scattered, uncertain applause that quickly died. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his expensive suit hanging a little loose. He gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles white. "Good morning," he began, his voice strained, echoing slightly in the vast space. We are gathered today under difficult circumstances. There have been allegations, rumors, and a great deal of misinformation that has caused significant concern for our partners, our shareholders, and our employees." He was a master of the vague non-apology. He spoke of missteps and lapses in oversight. He talked about recommitting to our core values and the challenge of rapid growth. He never used the words fraud, theft, or embezzlement. He never used the word Helene. He was trying to contain the damage, to frame this as a procedural error, a simple stumble from which the company, under his steady leadership, would quickly recover. "We have always prided ourselves on integrity," he said, his voice attempting to swell with a conviction it no longer possessed. "And we will emerge from this stronger and more transparent than ever before." He finished his empty speech and took his seat at the far end of the long table. The applause was thin, obligatory. Then, she made her entrance, from the opposite side of the stage. Helene. She moved like she always did, with her back straight and her chin high. But it was a performance. Her face was a mask of thick, heavy foundation, a desperate attempt to cover the lingering, yellowish-green shadow of a bruise on her jawline. It was a different bruise from mine, a mirror image from a different, later impact. I didn't know where it came from, and I didn't care. It was just another fact. Her eyes, usually so sharp and cold, were wide, darting, taking in the size of the crowd, the cameras. She looked like a trapped animal, forced onto a brightly lit stage. She sat down next to my father, but a distinct, calculated foot of space remained between their chairs. Judge Davies, the head of the audit committee, stepped to the podium. His voice was the antithesis of my father's, cold, precise, and devoid of emotion. "This is not a hearing on rumors," he said, his judicial tone cutting through the murmur of the crowd. This is a special meeting of the shareholders to provide a preliminary report from the Audit Committee's independent investigation. The board has a duty of transparency. To that end, I will now invite Ms. Mara Quinn, the company's Director of Compliance and the formal whistleblower in this matter, to present her findings. A single spotlight hit me as I stood from my seat in the front row and walked up the stairs to the stage. I could feel thousands of eyes on me, on the faded map of my own bruise, which I wore with no concealer at all. I could feel my father's gaze, burning into the side of my head. I did not look at him. I reached the central podium. I placed my laptop on it, connecting the cable. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. I did not start with an introduction. I did not start with an apology. I started with the data. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady, amplified throughout the hall. "What you see behind me is a flow map of funds misappropriated from the Norcrest Cares Community Grant." The screen showed a clean, brutal diagram, a box labeled Norcrest Dynamics at the top, an arrow pointing down to a box labeled Braxton Vale Charitable Fund. From there, the line split. One arrow pointed to a box labeled Everlyn Crest HOA, showing the 33% kickback. The other arrow, the new one, pointed to a box labeled Blue Ridge Contracting, LLC, the shell company run by Helene's brother. From Blue Ridge, a final arrow pointed to a box labeled Aura Digital Marketing, the firm building Sable's personal brand. It was a family tree of corruption, drawn in the cold language of an audit. Over an 18-month period, I continued, corporate funds, designated for charity in our public ESG reports, were funneled through a series of shell companies and undisclosed related party agreements. I clicked. The screen changed to the W-9 forms, the identical tax IDs side by side. I clicked again. The screen showed the contract for the Everlyn Youth Gardens. I clicked again. The screen showed the bank transfer instructions. The reference code for Sable's media firm highlighted in bright red. The room was dead silent. There was no shuffling, no coughing, just the sound of my voice, calmly, clinically, dissecting the fraud. The total exposure, from the findings of this preliminary report, exceeds $700,000. A collective gasp, a sharp intake of breath, rippled through the auditorium. From the third row, a man stood up. He was a major institutional investor, someone who controlled a massive block of shares. His voice was loud, angry. "A simple question. Ms. Quinn," he boomed. "This is all paper. This is all process. But process can be forged. Contracts can be faked. Who gave the final approval? Who is the mind behind this?" I paused. I looked at him. "Your question is, who approved this? I will answer that." I didn't turn around. I just clicked the mouse. The screen changed. It was no longer a diagram. It was a high-resolution, full-screen scan of a single page. It was the signature page for the $150,000 Everlyn Youth Gardens contract. There, at the bottom, were two signatures, my father's, as CEO, and beside it, Helene's, and next to hers, the unmistakable, arrogant impression of her personal embossed seal. I let the image hang there, in the silence. Every person in the 3,000-seat hall could read her name. The cameras in the back zoomed in, broadcasting that signature onto the local news, live. I stepped back from the podium. Judge Davies stepped forward. "To answer the question," the judge said, his voice grave, "the board's external counsel has been conducting its own parallel investigation for the past 48 hours. A man in a dark suit, whom I recognized from the boardroom meeting, rose from the front row and took the podium. He was the lead partner from the white-collar defense firm. "We have reviewed Ms. Quinn's findings," he said, his voice clipped, emotionless. "We have independently subpoenaed bank records and incorporation documents. Our preliminary conclusion is that the facts, as presented by Ms. Quinn, are accurate. The flow of funds is verified. The shell companies are confirmed. The signatures are authentic." It was a kill shot, a public confirmation, from the highest legal authority. that everything I had uncovered was true. The noise started then. It wasn't a gasp. It was a roar. A deep, angry murmur that rose from the floor of the auditorium like a wave. It was the sound of thousands of people, employees, investors, retirees, all realizing, at the exact same moment, that they had been lied to, that the money they had invested, the company they worked for, had been used as a private bank account by the woman sitting on the stage. I watched Helene. Her face was a mask of chalky, powdered terror. My father was staring at his hands, on the table, as if he had never seen them before. I stepped forward to the podium one last time. The crowd quieted, waiting. I looked out, not at any one person, but at the sea of faces, at the cameras, at the entire world my father had built. "This investigation began," I said, my voice clear, ringing with the authority of the facts. "Because of a landscaping contract. It began with questions about a broken swing set in a playground. It began on a patch of grass, behind a house." I unconsciously touched the faint shadow on my cheek. Our ESG report, the one this company was so proud of, was built on a lie. It was built on a foundation of theft and conflicts of interest. We cannot sell a future of corporate responsibility to the world when our own ground is poisoned. I paused, letting the words land. We cannot operate on ground that was broken by violence. I turned, leaving the microphone, and walked back to my seat, the sound of the angry rising sea of voices crashing behind me. The Grayfield Community Center smelled of crock-pot chili, and damp autumn leaves tracked in on people's shoes. The lighting was the flat, unforgiving fluorescent hum of every municipal building in America. People sat in mismatched, squeaky folding chairs arranged in uneven rows on the polished linoleum floor. It was a world away from the silent, refrigerated air of the 32nd floor. It was real. The emergency HOA meeting had been organized on the community app, and what was usually a sparsely attended gathering of retirees was now a standing room-only event. The entire neighborhood was here, drawn by the digital drama that had erupted into a full-blown corporate and legal crisis. They had come for answers. They had come for blood. At a folding card table at the front of the room sat the remaining members of the HOA board, looking pale and beleaguered. Helene's chair was conspicuously empty. The meeting began with a tense, rambling statement from the board president, a man who normally only had to worry about complaints regarding holiday decoration timelines. He was hopelessly out of his depth. After 10 minutes of bureaucratic throat-clearing, a voice cut through the restless murmuring. "Let's just get to it." It was Lyle Peterson. He stood up from his chair in the front row. He wasn't holding a phone or a tablet. In one hand, he held his old Ring doorbell, the black plastic device now disconnected from its wiring. In his other hand, he held a small, silver external hard drive. He didn't grandstand or make a speech. He walked to the front, placed the two objects on the card table with a quiet, solid click, and looked at the board president. "This is the camera that recorded the assault by our former treasurer," he said, his voice the calm, factual tone of an engineer reporting a diagnostic. "And this is a triple redundant, time-stamped backup of all relevant footage and communications from the community server for the past 24 months. The originals have already been provided to the relevant authorities. I believe we have a motion on the floor to terminate the HOA's contract with Braxton Vale Services." A woman in the back shouted, "Seconded!" The board president, looking relieved to have something concrete to do, called for a vote. It wasn't a vote, it was an exorcism. A forest of hands shot into the air. The motion passed unanimously. The next motion, to remove the remaining board members who had served alongside Helene and to hold new elections, passed with an almost identical roar of approval. In 15 minutes, the community had cleansed itself. I was asked to speak next. I hadn't planned to. I was there as a resident, not an official, but Lyle had told them I could help. I walked to the small, portable microphone they had set up. The feedback squealed for a moment. Looking out at the faces of my neighbors, I felt a strange shift. I wasn't the director of compliance anymore. I was just Mara, from Lot 114. The woman who had gotten punched? The woman who had exposed the rot? I can't give you legal advice, I began, my voice clear and calm. But I can show you how to find the truth for yourselves. I didn't talk about fraud or embezzlement. I used simple words. I explained that every HOA is, by law, required to make its financial records available to its members. I walked them through the process of filing a formal request for documents. I showed them how to read a vendor invoice and cross-reference it with the budget. I told them to look for vague descriptions, for costs that seemed too high, for contracts that were renewed without a competitive bid. I wasn't giving them the answers. I was giving them the tools to find the answers for themselves. I was teaching them how to conduct their own audit. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then a ripple of applause. It was not the thunderous, angry sound from Norcrest Hall. It was warm, appreciative. It was the sound of a community feeling empowered. As I stepped away from the microphone, a little girl, no older than 7, darted out from her mother's side. It was Brenda's daughter, the mother who had complained about the broken swing set. The girl had a small, clumsy bouquet clutched in her fist. The flowers were mostly dandelions and clover, the kind a child picks from a lawn because they are bright, not because they are valuable. She held them up to me. "Miss," she said, her voice a small, serious whisper. "Mommy says our playground is going to get fixed now. Thank you." I crouched down to her level. I took the small, wilting bouquet from her hand. I looked at her earnest, hopeful face, and I felt something crack inside me. Not the cold, satisfying crack of a plan coming together, but a warm, thawing sensation. I smiled, and as I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes, I realized the deep, persistent ache in my cheek, the phantom throb that had been my constant companion for a week, had finally started to fade. It no longer hurt. "You're very welcome," I said. My phone, tucked away in my blazer pocket, vibrated. I almost ignored it. The small world inside this room felt infinitely more important than the vast, corporate world outside, but the vibration was insistent. I stood up, holding the little girl's flowers, and stepped into the hallway. I pulled out my phone. It was an email from Judge Davies, sent to my personal account. The subject was simple: Board of Directors, Final Resolution. The email was a PDF attachment of a formal, signed board resolution. My eyes scanned the legalese, picking out the key phrases, the final, brutal words that ended the story. Effective immediately. Helene Quinn is terminated for cause from all roles, responsibilities, and affiliations with Norcrest Dynamics. The company will pursue all legal avenues for the full restitution of misappropriated funds, estimated to be in excess of $1 million upon completion of the full forensic audit. The probationary employment of Sable Rostova within the Strategic Initiatives Department has been terminated, effective immediately. Fired, clawback, terminated. It was over. The corporate war was won. The victory confirmed not by a roar of applause, but by a quiet vibration in my pocket. I slid the phone away. The news felt strangely anticlimactic. The real victory wasn't in the cold, hard text of the resolution. It was back in that room. It was in the sound of neighbors talking, not whispering. It was in the determined look on Lyle's face. It was in the weight of a small bouquet of weeds in my hand. I walked back into the community center. The formal meeting had dissolved into a potluck dinner. People were lining up, filling paper plates with chili and cornbread. The angry, anxious energy was gone, replaced by a low, happy buzz of conversation. Someone put on music, a classic rock station playing softly from a portable speaker. Brenda caught my eye and waved me over to her table. Lyle was there, along with a few other neighbors I only knew by sight. They made room for me. I sat down, placing the small bouquet carefully in the center of the table. For the first time in a very long time, I ate a meal with people who were not performing, who were not calculating, who were not my family. The meal ended not with the sound of suspicious whispers, but with the clatter of forks on paper plates and the easy, genuine sound of neighbors laughing in the dark. It was Monday morning, 7:00 a.m. The 32nd floor boardroom was empty. The city was waking up below, and the morning sun cut a sharp, bright rectangle across the dark, polished granite of the table. The room was silent, clean, and cold, a perfect vacuum. I walked in. My heels made no sound on the thick carpet. I walked to the head of the table, to the chairman's seat, my father's seat. I placed a single, white, legal-sized envelope on the center of his leather blotter. It was not a letter of resignation. Resignation is an escape. This was a statement of terms. Inside was a formal request for a 3-month unpaid leave of absence. The request stated my purpose: to serve as an independent consultant, pro bono, for the Everlyn Crest Homeowners Association. My duties would be to oversee the full forensic audit of their finances and to manage the vendor selection and reconstruction of the community playground. Tucked behind that request was a second document, a new proposed framework for the Norcrest Dynamics Compliance and Ethics Charter. It was 20 pages long. It systematically eliminated all executive approval pathways that constituted a conflict of interest. It explicitly forbade any family member of an executive from holding financial authority over a related party, vendor, or charitable fund. It mandated a triple bid process for all contracts over $50,000, and it established a new, truly independent reporting line for the compliance department, straight to the audit committee, bypassing the CEO's office entirely. At the bottom of my request for leave, on the first page, I had added one handwritten line, just above my signature. I wrote, "Family is not a shield, it is a responsibility." I turned to leave. He was standing in the doorway, watching me. My father. He was dressed for the day, his briefcase in hand, but he had not entered the room. He stood, framed in the entrance, a silhouette against the bright, busy light of the outer hallway. His gaze flicked from my face, down to the white envelope on his chair, and then back to me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look betrayed. He looked, for the first time, like he was seeing me clearly. He was appraising the situation. He looked at my signature from across the room. He saw the finality of it. He gave a single, slow, infinitesimal nod. It was not an apology. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement, a concession. The terms had been accepted. I walked past him. I did not say a word. I stepped out of the boardroom's shadow and into the main executive corridor. The morning sun was flooding the 32nd floor, streaming through the massive glass walls, making the white marble floor almost blindingly bright. I walked directly into the light. As I passed the reception desk, I glanced at the old, framed photograph on the wall, the one of the executive team, my father at the center, all of them smiling from a decade ago. I used to see it as a monument to a dynasty. Now, it was just a picture in a frame, an artifact. I left it behind me. That evening, I stood in the yard behind my house. The air was cool and crisp. I looked at the shared fence line, the one that had vibrated with the impact, the one that had started it all. It stood straight and silent against the deep blue of the twilight. The wood was just wood. It no longer held any power. It no longer vibrated. I raised my hand and touched my cheek, where the bruise had been. The swelling was gone. The pain was gone. All that remained was a faint, yellowish shadow on the skin, a ghost that was already fading. It no longer spoke for me. It no longer defined the narrative. It was just a healing mark on my skin. The story ends here. In the quiet of an autumn evening, the park at Everlyn Crest is waiting for new swings, waiting for the sound of laughter, and the boardroom on the 32nd floor is waiting for new rules. Thank you so much for listening to the story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to chat and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe, like the video, and for extra support, hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.